Hello there! In this video I am somewhat further afield in southeast London in search of the ancient settlement of Wricklemarsh. It now only survives as a road name, but what a wonderful name it is, sounding like somewhere Puddleglum might have lived. I'm currently suffering with my back, so let's see how far down the eponymous road we can get before my spine gives out. That is one of the reasons why the view is a bit wonky, but even when fit I'm no Mike Jelves, so apologies for the terrible camera work as well. When my family moved back to Woolwich in the 1990s, we lived off Shooters Hill Road, and the nearby Wricklemarsh Road caught my eye, as it would, and at some point I also saw an old map that showed Wricklemarsh as an area. Without doing any research whatsoever, I vaguely assumed that the road was a remnant of some old hamlet or similar, probably lost under housing development and or the Rochester Way Relief Road, and remembered only in the name of the street. I recently found myself with time to kill in Kidbrooke, so went for a bimble and came across Wricklemarsh Road again. It's clearly of the 1930s, and I couldn't see anything that might indicate a lost hamlet. Again, I vaguely blamed the A2, but this time I was determined to do some actual research, somewhat easier now than in 1993. Although in those days, of course, I'd have been able to visit the nearby Woodlands Local History Museum, which went on to become the Greenwich Heritage Centre, which is now closed, and I will take every opportunity to mention this. Not to be too clickbaity about it, but what I discovered shocked me. I mean, I wasn't as surprised as I was back in the day when I discovered that wee Jimmy Cranky was not only a lady, she was married to that fella, but more surprised than I am these days when a government fails to deliver its promises on social care. Here you can see the general area we are talking about. This road I'm now marking in pink is the modern Wricklemarsh Road, as you can see bisected by the A2 there, not far from where it joins the Sun in the Sands roundabout on Shooters Hill Road, once the Roman road of Watling Street. Wricklemarsh is mentioned in the Domesday Book as a vill, the basic administrative unit, smaller than a manor. Its name is given as something like Witten Marsh, probably caused by a Norman scribe corrupting the local name of Rickle or Wricklemarsh, and nothing to do with the Witten. Writtle and Rickle mimic the babbling brooks and streams that would have cascaded down Shooters Hill into the marsh. In Domesday times, by which I still mean the 11th century and not now, it had ploughland enough for 4 teams of oxen, meaning around 50 inhabitants and an area of around 500 acres. It was pretty much the same size as its neighbour, Lee. Everyone in southeast London has a neighbour called Lee, or maybe Lee these days. The area is next mentioned as Wricklemarsh in King Edward I's 2084 rent accounts, the amount paid suggesting it had changed little since Domesday. After that, it barely troubles history until the 16th century, from when we start to know about the many families whose hands it passes through, including well-known local names like Hervey and Morden. If you're interested in who they all were, please see my main source for this bit, Wricklemarsh Revisited by Michael Egan, which is linked to below. Over this time, we can also see the name settle down as Rickle rather than Wricklemarsh. Wricklemarsh continued as a sleepy agricultural hamlet, though not an isolated one. In Tudor times, it would have been called upon by Greenwich Palace when they had visitors and needed extra supplies. The ancient Watling Street would have made it just about possible for farms around here to supply London with fresh dairy, and they certainly wouldn't have had to have got up too early to get to nearer market towns like Woolwich. Things were eventually to change though, and the inevitable gentrification set in. This began in the 1720s when the estate was bought from the Morden family by Sir Gregory Page. He demolished the old manor house and built a stately home, set in a landscape parkland, which was rather smaller than the Domesday Ville, there being 273 acres left after the various land sales over the years. On John Roke's epic map of the area around London in the 1740s, Wricklemarsh is labelled Ridley Marsh, perhaps a gentrification or mishearing of the old name. The extent of the park can be clearly seen. Blackheath village doesn't exist yet, hence the snobbery around it not being a proper ancient village, but you can also see there that it's the area labelled Dowager's Bottom. The dowager in question was Lady Susan Morden, last resident of the old manor house. The bottom refers to the area's geography, not hers. Her home was probably on the site of Park House, which was built in the 1780s and is now in Cresswell Park, serving as the presbytery of the late Victorian church next door. It was way too frustrating to try and match Roke's map perfectly to a modern view, but here's my best effort, with the new house sitting at the junction of modern Blackheath Park and Pond Road. The pond is long gone, but a boundary wall and a path remember its location. Nearby Morden College is also still very much there, almshouses which the sale of the Wricklemarsh estate helped to fund in perpetuity. To this day, the charity founded by Sir John Morden is dedicated to supporting older people. Wricklemarsh was a very stately home indeed, very much in the style of the time, and I've linked to as many more pictures as I can find of it below. Designed by John James, who was also architect of the Rangers House in Greenwich, it was famous for its lavish interiors and Sir Gregory's art collection, which included a Rubens and a Van Dyck. According to a contemporary description, Wricklemarsh was one of the finest houses in England, resembling a royal palace rather than a residence of a private gentleman. Sir Gregory also had a house at Westcombe Park and another at Well Hall, which came to be known as Page House and hung on until 1931. It was while living in Page House that Edith Nesbit wrote the famous children's novel, The Railway Children.
I've stood in a ginormous dog poop.
When we move to the Ordnance Survey map published in 1805, we can see that the house, now in Wricklemarsh Park, has been reduced to stumps. Despite costing £90,000, the modern equivalent of 16 million to build, it was not long for this world, itself falling quickly to further gentrification. Page and his wife died without having had any children, and the estate passed to his great-nephew, Sir Gregory Turner, who added Page to his name per the will, and became Sir Gregory Page Turner. Page Turner decided to sell up, and in 1783 the estate was bought by another name locals will recognise, John Cater. Prior to his purchase, the government considered buying the estate to use for the military academy, which ended up being in Woolwich. The survey done at that time enables us to reliably impose the boundaries of the estate on a modern map. Egan does this in Wricklemarsh Revisited, and there's no point in reinventing the wheel, so here is his map imposed on the modern aerial view. Cater bought the estate for the ridiculously knockdown price of £22,250, just under £3 million in today's money. He already had his own stately pile at Beckenham and had no interest in the Wricklemarsh house, which, unfashionable and vandalised, was considered surplus to requirements. Some of the estate was leased for development, like Montpellier Row and the Paragon, and the house was slowly demolished from 1787, with ruins standing until 1808, that remnant we saw on the 1805 map. The ruins were something of a tourist attraction, becoming the subject of a watercolour by Turner the Painter and an oil painting by William Marlowe entitled Elegant Company in the Ruins of Wricklemarsh House, which I have also linked to below. Cater did take the bits he liked of Wricklemarsh and used them at his home Beckenham Place, now a municipal golf club. With them went the last trace of Wricklemarsh on the maps until its revival in this Wricklemarsh Road during the interwar building boom. Cater's nephew John Barwell Cater further exploited the parkland for its development potential, and from the 1820s the Blackheath village we know today really began to take shape. The Caters that followed him were further able to take advantage of the early arrival of the railways, and the area developed into the affluent Victorian suburban village which it essentially still is. There was some very tasteful post-war redevelopment, but Blackheath benefited from early gentrification and therefore NIMBYism, and is better preserved than many older competitors. Traces of Wricklemarsh Park and its boundaries can still be seen in the shapes of the roads. None of these roads is Wricklemarsh Road though, which runs towards the area, but it's clear that it wasn't part of the ancient estate. In Victorian times, the area of the estate is identified as Blackheath Park, and where Wricklemarsh Road will be is still fields south of Shooters Hill Road in blue. By the time of the post-war aerial photo, Kidbrooke has been completely taken over by housing and the road has been fully developed. It has a junction with Rochester Way, marked green, the 1920s bypass to the ancient road. I've got no doubt whatsoever that anyone who has had this video suggested to them knows all about the abandoned London Ringway project, but if not, links below and God, enjoy that rabbit hole. The South Cross part of Ringway 1 would have destroyed most of South London, and even Blackheath village was significantly threatened by the demolition required to build a cut-and-cover tunnel for an 8-lane motorway. Although this was getting off very lightly indeed compared to everywhere else, there were protests and a counter-proposal for a bored tunnel was made and looked likely. The East Cross part of the Ringway around here took over existing plans, like the already underway vital improvements to the Blackwall Tunnel approach, which were complete by the late 60s, and the Dover Radial motorway at a very late stage of planning to replace or bypass Rochester Way from the Sun in the Sands roundabout and then down to meet the South Cross at Kidbrooke. This was also considered essential, and the required compulsory purchases had long been made. To most of South London's relief, the Ringways were cancelled in 1973, but people living around the increasingly unsafe Rochester Way were righteously angry that their necessary road had been lost to a folly. Years of lobbying and pro-motorway protests ensued to ensure that the Dover Radial plans still went ahead in some form. The resulting Rochester Way Relief Road was finally finished in 1988. In the area where it divides Wricklemarsh Road, the old Rochester Way still runs alongside the A2 as a local road. It was the road you can see earlier in the video that the buses run down that we took to cross over the dual carriageway. I did not make it to the end of Wricklemarsh Road, but it carries on like this till it hits the tidy wee post-war estate at Corelli Road. So, before I run out of footage, I must get to the point and actually answer my own question. What happened to the lost hamlet of Wricklemarsh? Well, it isn't truly lost, it just got gentrified early, and we call it Blackheath Village. Although, personally, I'd prefer it if we used its historical name, Dowager's Bottom. It was also apparently known as Dowager's Hole, but I thought I'd keep this one PG. This channel is not monetised, and I intend to keep it advert-free, but if you've enjoyed it enough to want to be supportive, please consider donating the traditional cost of a cup of coffee to the Greenwich Wildlife Network, link also below. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.